Kim Ho entered Dragon Slayer Academy with 0 stats, yet one reincarnation reward let him steal techniques simply by watching them happen. Before his first class even began, that copy skill had already captured an S-rank elemental attack from a battling dragon. The catch was brutal. Possessing a technique meant nothing if his body lacked the mana, traits, or control needed to use it. So instead of chasing one perfect build, Kim planned to collect useful abilities, strengthen their foundations, and combine them as situations demanded. In his former life, Dragon Slayer Academy had been a game he understood better than almost anyone playing it. He had raised heroes across every class, built 1,000 S-rank adventurers, and eventually became famous for creating terrifying support characters. His favorite system never focused on one champion. It let him develop ordinary people until their stories produced exceptional heroes. Now that same world had become real, while Kim himself had been dropped into it at the weakest possible starting point. Minutes earlier, he had still been sitting at his computer, wondering whether the game had anything left capable of surprising him. A new EX rank mission answered that question by ordering him to prevent the destruction of the world. Kim had never seen an EX rank mission, and the possibility of unknown content immediately overpowered whatever caution he should have felt. He accepted, expecting another difficult event, then opened his eyes inside the tutorial forest, with every displayed stat sitting at 0. A reincarnation notice appeared next, granting copy and giving him one advantage that had never existed on any character he previously controlled. The tutorial demanded survival for 10 minutes, which sounded manageable until 2 enormous dragons began tearing apart the sky above him. Their collision shook the forest, sending Kim sprinting between trees, while flames and lightning carved through everything behind him. Fear did not erase his gamer instincts. The moment one dragon prepared an elemental technique, Kim concentrated on the exact activation sequence. Copy required observation at the moment a skill was released, so missing the timing would waste the best opportunity imaginable. He watched through the chaos, endured the pressure, and received confirmation that an S-rank elemental skill had entered his available arsenal. The reward was absurd for a beginner, but Kim immediately noticed the limitation that kept it from making him invincible. His nearly non-existent mana could not support such a demanding attack, forcing him to treat the copied power as a future investment. Before reincarnation, Kim's 1000th S-rank success had been a vampire queen. He created her by giving an ordinary NPC a magic stone. The stone fused into her body and rewrote the character's development path. That transformation captured what Kim loved most about Dragon Slayer Academy. He preferred building potential over chasing one fixed damage class. By then, every ordinary class on his account had already reached S rank. Even starting a fresh account sounded boring because he knew the progression too well. The unexpected EX rank notice therefore felt like content designed specifically for him. Its objective was not a dungeon clear, but preventing world destruction. Kim had never encountered a mission above the familiar S rank ceiling. He even wondered whether EX rank heroes might exist somewhere beyond known progression. That curiosity was why he accepted before thinking about the consequences. The transition erased his computer room and replaced it with a living forest. His status screen showed no inherited levels from the account he had mastered. Every displayed stat had returned to the beginning. Copy was therefore his only exceptional starting advantage. The dragons above him were not tutorial decorations, but genuine lethal creatures. Their wings displaced enough air to change the wind across the forest. Fire gathered inside the red dragon's mouth before the strongest exchange. The blue dragon answered by concentrating electrical breath of its own. Kim recognized both attack patterns from the game, but had never felt their pressure physically. He ran before the paired breaths collided across the forest. The explosion behind him proved that remembered mechanics now carried real consequences. Completing the survival timer did not make him stronger automatically. It only delivered him alive to the next stage of the academy route. Both dragons gathered their strongest breaths, and Kim abandoned experimentation before the forest disappeared beneath overlapping fire and electricity. He escaped the blast radius just as the first tutorial objective completed, and the next instruction redirected him toward the academy train. The stations looked familiar, yet the people waiting there did not match the cast Kim remembered from the original game. That discrepancy mattered because his greatest advantage was knowledge, and unfamiliar characters meant the timeline could already be changing around him. Inside one compartment, Kim found a quiet white-haired girl and another freshman searching for somewhere to sit. The girl introduced herself as Seo Yane, while the friendly swordsman beside them gave his name as Hian. Their conversation looked harmless, but Yan possessed unusual eyes, capable of reading the attributes of people around her. Hian appeared ordinary when she examined him, yet Kim's status returned question marks instead of the information she expected. Yan tried to respond politely by offering homemade chocolate cookies, while Kim quietly registered that her perception ability could become important later. Hian showed them a sealed sacred relic, explaining that he currently relied on an ordinary iron sword because the better weapon remained unusable. Kim immediately suggested stronger equipment, treating Hian less like a stranger and more like a hero build, whose weaknesses could already be corrected. Their calm ride ended when another student entered the compartment while trying to avoid members of the disciplinary committee. The newcomer claimed he was promoting a fundraising service, although the committee pursuing him clearly believed his activities violated academy rules. Their leader arrived with lightning gathered around her hand and demanded that the fleeing student surrender what he had taken. Kim recognized an opportunity before he cared about the argument, because watching a real spell at close range could copy another technique. He deliberately dropped Yane's cookie near the confrontation, giving himself an excuse to move directly into the attack's path. The committee leader released a bird-shaped lightning spell, expecting the accused student to take the punishment without further resistance. Kim reached into its route and caught the electrical bird long enough to study how the spell moved and maintained its shape. Everyone treated the intervention like reckless nonsense, while Kim privately confirmed that the technique had been copied successfully. Hian backed him anyway,
warning the committee
that he would not stand aside if they turned this misunderstanding into a fight. Rather than escalate over a cookie, the committee leader compensated Kim with a dessert coupon and continued dealing with the actual rule breaker. Once she left, Kim analyzed the lightning spell for Hian and explained why its control revealed the caster's current combat experience. The technique, called Hummingbird, could curve through the air, but its path depended heavily on the precision of the person controlling it. Kim had also noticed that an E-rank spell carried power closer to D rank, implying that the committee leader possessed exceptional talent or mana. Hian was impressed by how much information Kim extracted from one exchange, strengthening his belief that this new friend understood combat unusually well. Kim then asked Hian for help with something far less respectable, leading him toward an abandoned casino car hidden elsewhere on the train. Beneath an old cover stood a damaged slot machine connected to a secret event Kim remembered from the game. The machine appeared useless, but Kim knew repeated attempts eventually triggered a guaranteed reward that could matter enormously for a beginner. Hian agreed to keep watch even after learning that using the machine violated the rules, accepting responsibility for protecting his new friend. That decision became important when Han Soman arrived with an overwhelming aura and immediately demanded to know why they were there. Hian challenged her before she could stop Kim, turning the corridor into a sword duel while Kim remained beside the secret machine. Soman had been trained by the Empress, and the difference in experience quickly pushed Hian into a defensive fight he could not comfortably sustain. Kim responded by using one of his support abilities to amplify Hian, proving that his strength still came from improving other people's performance. The sudden increase Hian contest Soman's sword directly, while Kim kept counting the remaining seconds on the temporary enhancement. Meanwhile, each pull of the slot machine produced another disappointing reward, forcing Kim to spend nearly every chance before the guarantee activated. On the final important attempt, the machine stopped differently and released the grand prize Kim had been trying to obtain. A black ice crystal dropped into his hands, valuable because its dangerous freezing effect could become useful if his resistance survived the consumption. Soman launched another heavy attack at Hian, just as Kim swallowed the crystal instead of storing it for some safer moment. Cold immediately spread through his throat and body, strong enough that anyone without suitable resistance could have frozen from the inside. Kim endured the effect until his resistance suppressed the danger, allowing his body to absorb the crystal's energy rather than suffer its intended punishment. The others could barely understand why he had consumed something so hazardous, but Kim treated the result as another calculated shortcut. Hian asked to see Soman's stronger sword technique again, only to be refused because techniques of that level carried restrictions she would not reveal. With the secret event completed, the train finally approached the island that housed Dragon Slayer Academy and the city surrounding it. The island had once been lawless until a powerful hero conquered its dungeons, stabilized the region, and established the school that now trained dragon slayers. Kim knew that history already, so he focused instead on the students whose presence differed from the version of the academy he remembered. At the entrance, upperclassmen directed the freshmen through the grounds, while animals, relics, and magic made the campus feel more dangerous than ceremonial. Before Kim could settle in, the disciplinary committee intercepted him again and ordered him into their office for questioning. Their chief, Oh Se-hun, reviewed the train incident and concluded that the crystal itself was not forbidden, leaving no clear basis for punishment. The lightning mage remained suspicious because Kim had swallowed an item capable of killing an ordinary freshman without even hesitating. She suggested investigating his abilities more aggressively. But the chief rejected the idea when she could not justify what they would do afterward. Kim left without punishment and rejoined his classmates in time for the academy's opening ceremony. The principal looked surprisingly casual for a retired hero, powerful enough that veteran students still treated his reputation with respect. His speech emphasized that the academy existed to produce genuine dragon slayers, not students who merely collected impressive grades. A teacher followed with practical warnings, including a restriction that freshmen could only enter the first floor of the academy dungeon. Kim listened because rules created opportunities as often as obstacles, especially when he already knew which hidden events existed beneath the official structure. That evening, he returned to his dorm instead of celebrating and began meditating as soon as the room became quiet. Every copied technique ultimately depended on an energy source, so forming a stronger core mattered more than showing off the S-rank skill he could not yet afford. The black ice crystal had already improved his starting condition, giving him confidence that his core formation would produce better results than ordinary beginners expected. Elsewhere, Hien also trained alone, replaying his duel with Soman and admitting privately that Kim's amplification had prevented a clear defeat. Hien considered asking for more help, then chose to struggle independently because he wanted to become enough to stand beside his first real friend. The following morning, Kim entered class expecting ordinary academy instruction, and instead met Lee Sudok, a man student called the Human Butcher. Lee's reputation came from hunting people who crossed the line from powerful heroes into dangerous villains, making his casual presence deeply unsettling. He explained the academy's grading system with the same bluntness, warning that poor attitude could actually drag a student's score below 0. Exams would involve dungeons, practical combat, and relative PvP performance, meaning students could not hide forever behind theory or family prestige. Kim welcomed that structure because every practical test placed rare abilities directly in front of copy. Lee sent the class toward the arena, where freshmen were already fighting through a knockout exercise built around endurance and a strict time limit. A draw earned nothing, so surviving without creating an opening could be just as useless as losing outright. When Kim received a system mission demanding a strong exam result, he decided the arena could also serve as reconnaissance for future copying targets. His first opponent came from Ruby Tower and specialized in fire magic, immediately assuming his cheap staff belonged to a defensive earth mage. She wanted an easy public victory and opened with combustion, pouring enough power into the arena to impress the watching freshmen. When the smoke cleared, Kim's health had not moved, forcing her to abandon the idea that one strong spell would finish the unknown student. A second attack created a magic circle beneath his feet and erupted into a pillar of fire. Yet Kim remained standing afterward without visible damage. The Ruby student burned through her own stamina while trying to understand what defensive method could ignore attacks that normally overwhelmed freshmen. Kim finally countered with Hummingbird, sending the copied lightning technique across the arena toward the caster who had exhausted herself attacking him. She dodged its initial route, only for the bird to curve back under Kim's improved control and strike from an angle she had not protected. Paralysis ended the match, giving Kim a clean victory while revealing only a small portion of the arsenal already available to him. The crowd reacted far more strongly than he wanted, and Kim realized that even careful restraint could attract attention when the result looked impossible. His next opponent was the Lightning Committee girl, whose pride and family reputation made a serious fight likely to reveal far too much. Kim surrendered immediately, claiming exhaustion and accepting the ridicule, because controlling his public image mattered more than collecting one additional arena win. As he walked away, he reminded the furious girl about the dessert coupon she still owed him, proving that even strategic defeat could produce something useful. The committee girl took Kim's surrender personally, then demolished her next opponent with lightning, intense enough to prove why he had avoided that matchup. Hyun watched the result beside Kim and admitted that giving up had probably been the safer decision. Even if everyone else called it cowardice, Hyun was satisfied with that misunderstanding, because an underestimated support could move through the academy more freely than a celebrated prodigy. Yane entered the arena next, revealing that her combat role involved firearms rather than the kind of traditional spellcasting Kim had expected. Her performance gave Kim another reminder that this timeline contained characters and builds he had never encountered in the game. Instead of panicking over every difference, he began separating useful information into potential allies, dangerous rivals, and future copy targets. Several freshmen already stood out, including Park Nari, a druid whose animal companion and club backing made her much more dangerous than appearances suggested. Hyun later drew a disciple connected to a famous king, creating a matchup that looked unfavorable even before the first sword was raised. Kim told the others that Hyun's opponent probably had the advantage, but he refused to conclude that advantage automatically meant victory. Hyun's growth, sealed relic, and willingness to learn made him the kind of character whose future could change drastically with the right support. Kim watched every exchange while quietly comparing movement, mana control, weapon quality, and hidden habits against the knowledge he already possessed. By the end of the exercise, he had learned more from observing the freshmen than he would have gained from recklessly fighting every strong student himself. The Lightning Committee girl demolished her next opponent almost immediately after Kim surrendered. Her Topaz Tower opponent barely had time to establish a defense. One lightning release left him lying on the arena floor. Kim treated the result as confirmation that avoiding her serious match was correct. Her irritated glance toward him showed she had not forgiven the surrender. Yane's own turn revealed a ranged build centered around a firearm. That surprised Kim, because her current role differed from what he expected. He watched how she aimed, rather than assuming her quiet personality meant weak combat instincts. Several other freshmen also displayed family techniques, unavailable in ordinary starter builds. Kim began mentally ranking which abilities deserved future copy opportunities. Park Nari stood out because the druid's companion expanded her tactical options dramatically. Another talented student hid enough strength that public rankings underestimated the real threat. The Order of Knights also had a freshman whose background demanded attention. Kim wrote down names instead of trusting memory alone in the altered timeline. Hyun's difficult matchup against a famous disciple became another useful benchmark. The opponent carried better reputation and cleaner formal training. Hyun still showed enough resistance that Kim refused to call the result predetermined. Those fights helped Kim separate raw talent from actual combat readiness. After the arena, Yane remained unusually quiet around the group. Kim remembered the cookie she had shared on the train. He decided the committee's dessert coupon partly belonged to her. Instead of making the moment dramatic, he shared food and sat beside her. The small gesture reduced the awkward distance created by their different personalities. Kim realized he cared about her mood more than he expected from a new acquaintance. That personal connection later made her improvement matter beyond simple build efficiency. The academy moved quickly into dungeon evaluation, where students would earn points through actual combat rather than controlled arena exchanges. Kim used the transition to check on Yane, whose quiet personality made it difficult to tell whether she felt confident about the upcoming test. Since she had been his first friendly connection in this altered world, her discomfort bothered him more than he expected. He shared part of the dessert reward from the committee incident, turning an awkward conversation into a simple moment that improved their relationship. When his own dungeon turn arrived, Kim entered with a cheap staff and no intention of revealing what his real build could already accomplish. The first goblin charged directly, only to slam into the staff hard enough that Kim realized ordinary weapons from defeated monsters would be perfectly usable. He took the goblin's dagger and threw it into the eye of another creature appearing nearby, replacing Seek's starting gear with whatever the dungeon supplied. An abandoned axe became his next tool, and Kim began rotating enemy weapons instead of wasting valuable mana on unnecessary copied spells. Familiar spawn patterns let him predict where additional monsters would appear, turning what looked like improvisation into a route built from veteran knowledge. His score climbed rapidly as he used terrain, timing, and monster equipment more efficiently than any freshman should have understood. After only a few minutes, the point total was already high enough that preserving a recording would create questions he did not want to answer. Kim deliberately disabled the replay, sacrificing the chance to display a perfect run in exchange for keeping his true methods hidden. He continued clearing efficiently, allowing the official result to remain impressive without handing teachers a detailed explanation of how he achieved it. Other students returned from their own runs, carrying exhaustion, injuries, and scores that reflected the difference between theory and real dungeon pressure. Yane completed her challenge after remembering advice about concentrating mana more effectively before committing to an attack. She defeated the goblins blocking her route and emerged with a score high enough to place ahead of several students who had looked stronger outside. The class was dismissed after the exam, but Lee Sudok did not forget the freshman whose performance made less sense the longer he considered it. He went directly to the academy's recording staff and demanded Kim's dungeon replay so he could inspect the suspicious run himself. The system showed nothing because Kim had deleted the footage, forcing Lee to examine entry logs instead of watching the actual battle. That missing record convinced him the freshman had hidden something deliberately, which was more concerning than an ordinary student simply overperforming. The academy faced infiltration and hostile factions, so unexplained strength could indicate talent, secret training, or a threat planted among the freshmen. Lee could not accuse Kim without evidence. But from that moment, the instructor began treating him as someone worth investigating carefully. Kim remained unaware of the full suspicion and concentrated on a different problem, obtaining resources for the hidden plans he remembered from the game. One opportunity required a dungeon pass, something freshmen could not casually acquire without connections, achievements, or a useful favor to trade. He approached Hyun with a proposal that involved entering a dangerous dungeon together once Kim secured access. Hyun understood that the route carried real risk, yet accepted because he believed following Kim could accelerate the strength he desperately wanted. Kim promised to obtain the pass within roughly 2 weeks, then began searching for the engineering resources needed to support that promise. His first stop was a neglected magic workshop, whose owner clearly preferred working alone over entertaining another curious freshman. The engineer told Kim to visit the prestigious main workshop instead, but Kim insisted on quietly observing the work already being done there. One technique immediately caught his attention because the craftsman used a B-rank ability that could become extremely valuable for dismantling magical equipment. Kim extended his hand at the right moment and used copy again, adding a non-combat skill that could unlock materials, repairs, and hidden mechanisms later. That choice showed why his build could become dangerous. Copy did not care whether an ability looked heroic, as long as it solved a future problem. Combat spells gave power, but crafting, perception, and support techniques created the combinations that let him exploit game knowledge fully. Kim returned to training with more options than before, while Hyun continued strengthening his body, enough to break solid walls with his fists. Zeus announced that future PvP matches would use longer time limits and require every first-year student to complete several battles for grading. A new subquest appeared for Kim, ordering him to finish the required matches before the deadline, and turning ordinary classwork into another reward opportunity. He headed toward the arena with Hyun, confident that controlled fights could improve allies, while keeping his own strongest abilities concealed. One opponent entered with the arrogance of someone who believed Kim's earlier surrender had exposed a coward rather than a strategist. Kim accepted the challenge long enough to dismantle that assumption, beating him so convincingly that the boy demanded another attempt immediately. The rematch ended the same way, and Kim asked whether his opponent had learned anything from repeatedly charging without correcting the underlying mistake. Humiliated but stubborn, the student wanted more instruction, giving Kim the chance to turn combat experience into another negotiated exchange. Kim offered guidance for a fee, and the desperate freshman handed over a valuable family pill, rather than continue wasting losses without improvement. Kim accepted the item, but required secrecy, preventing the training session from becoming another public rumor about his actual skill level. By the time the student finally admitted his earlier judgment had been wrong, Kim had completed the required battles and gained an additional resource. Outside the arena, his reputation remained confusing by design. Some students saw a lucky support, others saw a suspicious fighter, and few understood both. Kim used that ambiguity while finishing another project, a magic cube constructed from materials and copied engineering knowledge gathered around campus. When the cube finally activated, life energy radiated strongly enough that he knew certain students would notice it without any direct advertisement. Rather than announce the item publicly, Kim carried it through a hallway where Park Nari and her animal companion were likely to pass. The druid's tiger reacted exactly as expected, jumping toward the cube because animals could sense the concentrated life energy inside it. Nari hurried after her companion and apologized, while Kim pretended the encounter had happened accidentally. Instead of following a carefully staged plan, she noticed the cube's unusual energy, creating curiosity inside a powerful club without Kim needing to explain its value or beg for attention. That was the kind of leverage Kim preferred. Let other people discover something desirable, then negotiate when they came asking for it. Class interrupted the plan when a strange orb suddenly expanded around the students and threw the academy into an unexpected emergency. Panic spread because nobody understood why the magical phenomenon had appeared, or whether they were facing an attack, test, for system malfunction. Kim stayed observant, checking who reacted intelligently under pressure and which abilities appeared when students believed the danger was real. The incident soon connected to missing items, academy discipline, and one of the underground organizations operating beneath the school's official clubs. A confrontation formed around accusations that prohibited equipment had disappeared, with several members refusing to cooperate. Despite the threat of collective punishment, the argument exposed tensions between the disciplinary structure and students who handled forbidden tools through less respectable channels. Kim followed that trail toward the Thieves' Club, partly because its members could reach places ordinary freshmen could not enter safely. One club contact brought him to their base, only to be kicked aside by the woman leading the group for arriving carelessly. The president, Dong-ga-yong, introduced herself after the commotion and immediately focused on the unusual item Kim had used during the academy incident. She inspected it with obvious greed, openly admitting that equipment capable of bypassing certain restrictions was exactly the kind of thing thieves valued. Kim remained calm because her interest gave him bargaining power, and he had no intention of surrendering useful technology, merely because the club wanted it. Instead, he began negotiating access, materials, and future help, treating the dangerous club as another system of resources that could be optimized. The Thieves' Club eventually prepared a raid on a temporary warehouse, holding confiscated or restricted items under academy supervision. Kim joined while masking his identity, not because he trusted everyone involved, but because as the operation overlapped directly with things he needed. Their path was filled with security spells, patrols, and council members capable of exposing the entire group if even one person made a careless mistake. Kim observed a thief's movement technique during the infiltration and copied the B-rank footsteps, adding mobility to the growing collection inside his build. The group used diversions while advancing through the old building, including magical insects that distracted guards before the thieves slipped past them. At one corridor, Kim encountered a council fighter named Sun, who recognized most intruders but had never seen the masked freshman before. Sun filled the passage with stone attacks and summoned ranged weapons, expecting the unknown trespasser to surrender. Once movement became impossible, Kim answered with Hummingbird, curving the electric spell through the corridor to disrupt projectiles and force openings through Sun's layered defense. The council fighter was stunned by the precision, correctly realizing that an ordinary freshman should not control the low-rank technique that efficiently. Kim passed him without revealing his identity, prioritizing the warehouse objective rather than turning the encounter into a pointless duel. Deeper inside, club members reached the confiscated supplies and started separating useful targets from items that would only slow their escape. A forbidden ability was used during the operation, leaving one academy member injured badly enough that the consequences could not simply disappear afterward. The academy orb incident began in the middle of an ordinary classroom dismissal. A small sphere appeared before the students and expanded without warning. Several freshmen screamed because nobody knew whether the phenomenon was an attack. Kim used the confusion to observe who stayed functional under unexpected pressure. The aftermath exposed a dispute over confiscated and prohibited equipment. Missing items placed several underground club members under disciplinary suspicion. One group refused to cooperate, even when collecting. The argument eventually guided Kim toward Dong-ga-yong's Thieves' Club. Their base looked chaotic enough that the president kicked her own member for carelessness. Dong Gaiyong's first serious interest was the item Kim had used during the disturbance. She recognized that bypassing a magical wave had enormous value for thieves. Kim refused to sell cheaply, simply because she understood the item's usefulness. The later warehouse raid relied on disguises, diversions, and precise timing. A magical mirror helped the thieves inspect guarded space before entering. Butterfly familiars were used to distract Academy security. From another direction, twins pinned one council member before his resistance could delay the whole group. Kim moved separately enough that most guards never learned his identity. Sun's stone attacks filled one corridor with spikes and summoned ranged fire. Hummingbird curved through that pressure and redirected one projectile lane. Sun recognized the control as far beyond ordinary beginner casting. Kim still avoided finishing him because the warehouse mattered more than a duel. The club reached its temporary storage target while security closed around the building. A forbidden technique injured an Academy member during the escape. That injury later turned a successful theft into a serious internal problem. Kim left with useful items, but also another reason for the disciplinary office to watch him. The Thieves' Club escaped with what it needed, but the injury guaranteed disciplinary pressure and internal arguments. Once everyone returned to campus. Back at their base, Dong Gaiyong inspected Kim's hand first, worried that he might have unleashed the dangerous technique people had begun associating with him. Kim assured her he never used the Infernal Fist without a plan, implying that even his most destructive option remained under deliberate control. He then opened his storage and poured out the acquired items, completing the exchange he had negotiated before the infiltration. Dong Gaiyong looked at the haul like treasure, confirming that Kim had converted one risky mission into resources valuable to several future projects. She offered him membership in the Thieves' Club, but Kim refused to bind himself to one organization, while so many Academy factions could still be useful. Remaining unaffiliated preserved his freedom to trade with engineers, guilds, thieves, druids, and students, without inheriting their rivalries automatically. News of his unusual cube continued spreading, eventually drawing attentions from stronger organizations whose members wanted either the item or the person who built it. One green-haired student tried intimidation, assuming a freshman outside the major factions could be forced into cooperation. Through a quick beating, Kim released Hummingbird directly in front of him and dropped the aggressor before the threat had time to become an actual fight. The companion beside the fallen student immediately recognized that Kim's control was abnormal and chose apology over escalating into another humiliating defeat. Kim walked away with his schedule intact, while the Academy's club slowly realized that the quiet support freshman was much harder to pressure than expected. Kim's next problem was converting the cube's growing reputation into materials rare enough to support the builds he could not complete alone. Representatives from powerful groups approached with demands disguised as invitations, expecting an unaffiliated freshman to accept whatever terms they offered. Kim rejected the assumption immediately, telling them that if their leaders wanted his work, those leaders could negotiate with him personally. That confidence irritated, accustomed him to family status carrying more weight than a first-year student's refusal. Park Nari's interest mattered more because she actually possessed something Kim needed: access to resources, and a reason to value the cube beyond prestige. Her animal companion repeatedly reacted to its life energy, proving the item offered a practical benefit, rather than simply looking impressive. When negotiations opened, one faction demanded an unreasonable exchange, and Kim ended the conversations, rather than bargain against himself. Nari stopped him before he left and revealed that she owned a blank skill book despite not yet having the right ability to inscribe into it. That changed the deal, because the book fit Kim's current plans far better than whatever status the other club had tried to offer. After confirming Nari genuinely wanted the cube, both sides completed the exchange, and Kim left with another scarce resource, secured through leverage instead of force. Rivals still wanted a duel, claiming the earlier confrontation had left unfinished business between them. Kim refused again because pride alone was not a useful reward, and he had no reason to fight whenever someone else demanded entertainment. The rival finally raised the stakes by offering a VIP ticket, valuable enough to unlock access Kim had been trying to obtain. That changed Kim's answer instantly, because a dangerous fight became worthwhile the moment victories solved an actual progression problem. He set the duel for 2 days later and openly said he needed the time to learn something new. The rival laughed at the idea that a freshman could master a meaningful technique in only 2 days, exactly the reaction Kim expected. Kim had already selected Windburst, a movement and control spell that could counter the rival's heavy summoned golem without requiring overwhelming raw damage. Instead of grinding randomly, he focused on the minimum mechanics needed to make that one skill reliable under pressure. The blank skill book and his copied knowledge
gave him a route unavailable to ordinary students
who had to spend far longer acquiring techniques conventionally. By the time the duel arrived, Kim had not become stronger in every category. He had simply prepared the one answer his opponent was least ready for. The rival summoned a massive wooden golem and expected its size to end the match before Kim could establish any support strategy. Kim avoided the opening fist, climbed along the creature's arm, and used wind at the moment its balance shifted forward. Windbursts struck from the right angle, turning the golem's own mass against it and sending the giant construct crashing backward. The audience saw a freshman defeat a supposedly superior summon with a newly learned technique, while Kim saw only a solved matchup. His rival could not recover the fight, and the promised VIP ticket finally passed into Kim's hands. That victory also made it harder for Academy factions to dismiss his earlier successes as accidents or favorable pairings. Kim accepted the attention only because the ticket and materials were worth the cost, then returned immediately to engineering rather than celebrate. A workshop leader became interested in his designs and offered equipment access if Kim shared enough technical information to justify the arrangement. Kim agreed to exchange selected designs while keeping the core of his long-term project under his own control. The engineer invited him to join the club outright, but Kim declined for the same reason he had rejected the Thieves Club's membership. A Susur arrangement gave him workshop privileges without turning every rival organization into an automatic enemy. With those foundations secured, Kim began planning what he privately considered an ultimate weapon built from several systems rather than one rare artifact. Meanwhile, the rival faction suffered internal pressure because losing publicly to an unaffiliated freshman damaged both pride and reputation. Senior members argued about blame, expulsion, and whether one student's mistake had exposed broader weakness inside their group. Kim did not need to interfere. His victory had already created consequences that would keep those rivals occupied with each other. Academy classes soon shifted back toward practical dungeon work, this time placing students into pairs and rewarding efficient extermination. Kim viewed random teammates as another opportunity because the right partner could expose a useful ability he had never seen before. He especially wanted someone whose technique interacted well with support amplification, allowing Copy and his old game knowledge to create immediate synergy. When CO Yane became one of his partners, Kim chose to treat the mission as training for her rather than another chance to dominate personally. Yan still lacked confidence in several fundamentals, but her shooting ability and composure gave her much more potential than her current results suggested. Kim instructed her to practice mana control before chasing flashy attacks, explaining that better foundations would improve everything she already knew. Inside the dungeon, they moved through Goblin encounters, while Kim deliberately left clean finishing opportunities for Yane to recognize and exploit. One elite Goblin offered bonus points and carried enough strength that an ordinary pair might have avoided the fight entirely. Kim attacked first with Hummingbird, forcing the monster to divide its attention, while Yan prepared a shot from the safer angle. The Goblin cut through the Lightning Bird and charged, but Kim amplified Yane at the exact moment her firing lane opened. Her shot landed cleanly, and the pair received the extra points without wasting the amount of mana a longer fight would have consumed. Kim praised the improvement because Yane had shortened the engagement through better timing, rather than simply firing harder. Later encounters followed the same principle. Kim controlled space, Yan made decisive attacks, and both adjusted after each mistake instead of repeating it. Their coordinated route ended with a boss whose health, durability, and patterns made a direct damage race inefficient. Kim told Yane she could defeat it herself, leaving her stunned because she expected him to carry the dangerous portion of the fight. He insisted that she already possessed enough power. The missing piece was trusting the mechanics she had practiced. Throughout the dungeon, Yane stepped forward alone, gathered her fire magic, and waited for the boss to commit to its heavy axe swing. She dodged the attack and answered with a fire orb, only to discover that the monster's damage reduction kept it standing. Instead of panicking, she adjusted her positioning and tried to finish the encounter before the strain of her own technique overheated her. Kim stayed outside the direct exchange, intervening only when support would reinforce her decision rather than replace it. Yane finally created the opening she needed, converting Kim's guidance into a victory she could reasonably consider her own. The result mattered more than the score because her confidence changed once she proved she could solve a boss without being carried. Kim later entered his solo portion with no need to maintain the same restraint he used around teammates. Flames wrapped his fists as he unleashed enough force to tear through the forest route and erase groups of monsters almost instantly. His solo score confirmed how much strength he had hidden during ordinary classes, so he again managed the evidence carefully rather than advertise everything. The weekly results strengthened his standing while preserving enough uncertainty that most students still could not describe what his actual class build was. Kim then returned to the resources gained from the duel, cube trade, and club connections, using each success to unlock the next, rather than stockpile trophies. His workshop projects required materials that ordinary first years could not simply purchase, pushing him toward deeper dungeon routes and more dangerous favors. The VIP ticket solved part of that problem by opening access connected to a hidden promise between academy organizations. Kim also began paying closer attention to Hyun's sword development. Knowing his friend's sealed relic and unusual lineage could become central later, Hyun wanted straightforward strength but kept steering him toward technique, durability, and matchup that would matter once enemies stopped being freshmen. During another organized match, Kim noticed an opponent whose right-hand movement did not fit the ordinary sword style he claimed to be using. The discrepancy reminded Kim of a secret identity and nickname hidden behind that fighter's public behavior. He interrupted the match and challenged the man to stop holding back, even offering to keep the replay private if secrecy was the real concern. When the fighter still denied everything, Kim mentioned the hidden nickname directly and offered additional information as the reward for a serious victory. Shock replaced the man's casual expression because a freshman should not have known that secret under any normal circumstance. The swordsman finally changed stance, revealing an exotic style that placed much greater pressure on Hyun than the earlier exchange had shown. Hyun responded by abandoning caution and fighting at full effort, unwilling to waste the chance Kim had created for him. Their blades collided repeatedly until Hyun began taking damage from attacks he could barely read in time. The hidden swordsman prepared a finishing blow, convinced the freshman had reached the limit of what he could survive. Hyun suddenly changed posture and waited, allowing the strike to approach far closer than anyone watching considered safe. At the last possible moment, he slipped beneath the blade and cut through the opening created by the opponent's committed attack. Both swords broke during the exchange, ending the confrontation before either side could continue recklessly. Kim stepped in and declared the demonstration sufficient, having learned what he needed without letting a training match become a fatal contest. The experience gave Hyun proof that technique and timing could bridge gaps that raw confidence alone would never overcome. Kim also gained confirmation about the hidden swordsman, another example of old game knowledge remaining useful, even as the current timeline changed. Returning to the workshop, he traded materials and dismantling labor with senior engineers, instead of paying every cost with money he did not have. The workshop president discovered that several defective items still contained expensive components worth recovering if someone had the right skill. Kim's copied dismantling ability made that work possible, turning discarded equipment into a supply line for future construction. He provided lists of what he needed, while the engineers provided access, tools, and materials they could source more easily than a freshman. One senior asked Kim to dismantle a separate project as a favor, deepening the relationship without forcing him into formal club membership. Kim accepted because every cooperative connection reduced the amount of time he had to spend farming ordinary resources himself. His attention then shifted toward an object whose main body remained hidden somewhere beneath an academy building. The component he had completed would be useless alone, but combining it with the hidden main body could advance his ultimate weapon dramatically. Reaching that location would require entering underground, areas students were not expected to explore freely. Kim did not rush immediately. He first waited for a class assignment that could provide cover, teammates, and a reason to move through dungeon infrastructure. Lee Sudok soon announced a weekly extermination theme in which terrain and partners would be randomized inside the practical dungeon. Hyun complained that they could not simply form their usual team, while Kim saw random pairing as another controlled opportunity to test unfamiliar abilities. He advised Yane to pause advanced mana bullet work temporarily and reinforce fundamentals before the new mission increased pressure. Entering the portal, Kim hoped for a partner whose power he could copy, because another useful abilities slot had become available. The system's expansion did not make his arsenal limitless overnight, but every new opening increased the number of combinations he could realistically maintain. When he saw who had arrived as his assigned partner, the surprise on his face revealed that the randomized pairing had produced someone particularly valuable. Kim immediately began calculating not just how to clear the dungeon, but what trait, technique, or combat habit could be learned during the process. That mindset separated him from ordinary students. Every class could produce grades, allies, materials, copied skills, or knowledge if approached correctly. The academy thought it was evaluating Kim Ho, while Kim quietly treated the entire institution as the largest progression system he had ever been given. The randomized mission paired Kim with Yane again, and her immediate irritation made it obvious that their placement exam history still bothered her. Kim decided to keep his intimidating act rather than explain himself, ordering her to move before she could turn the assignment into another argument. They sprinted through the dungeon forest, while Yane complained that she had wanted a simple day instead of another exhausting mission beside him. Kim never hesitated at intersections because the terrain matched patterns he had cleared countless times in the game. Monsters dropped from the trees as he moved, leaving Yane furious that he kept advancing. While she handled creatures he deliberately pulled into their route, she gradually realized his pace was not reckless. Every turn, spawn point, and attack looked familiar to him before it even happened. Kim suddenly stopped at a hole in the ground and identified what looked like a goblin den hidden beside their route. He only wanted Yane to test a spell near the entrance, but his harsh wording made her crawl inside before he could clarify. A violent explosion erupted from the den seconds later, and Yane emerged through the smoke pretending the excessive destruction had been completely intentional. The blast eliminated most of the creatures, but also revealed their position to the dungeon boss waiting nearby. A huge axe flew toward them without warning, forcing Kim to grab Yane and pull her away before the weapon could connect. He reminded her that strong damage meant nothing if she lost awareness the moment an enemy changed the pattern. When the returning axe reached the boss again, Kim judged the target manageable and told Yane to fight it herself. She stared at him in disbelief, expecting support after he had been controlling the pace of the mission from the beginning. Kim insisted that she already had enough power and needed the confidence to apply what she had practiced, without someone finishing every threat for her. Yan gathered fire magic and met the charging boss with a clean orb that struck directly, yet its damage reduction kept it standing. The creature raised its axe again, and she pushed forward because her overheating effect limited how long she could maintain full output. A weapon caught her off guard, leaving Yane unable to dodge before Kim deflected the attack with magic from the side. He repeated the warning about tunnel vision, then suggested the pillar of fire technique she had used during the earlier academy battle. Yane objected that the spell's range was too limited, so Kim offered to hold the boss inside the circle while she prepared. He leaped into the monster's path, destabilized its footing, and kept provoking attacks without stealing the finishing roll from her. While Kim controlled the boss, Yane forced herself to ignore the chaos and complete the large magic circle under pressure. The moment she announced the spell was ready, Kim moved clear and let the boss charge straight into the prepared kill zone. Her pillar of fire engulfed the monster and finally overcame the reduction effect, completing the mission with the attack she previously distrusted. Yan immediately asked Kim to disable the replay, offering a ruby valuable enough to compensate for any points lost by hiding the recording. Kim accepted after stopping her from offering an even larger gem, then congratulated her because the boss victory genuinely came from her execution. She left embarrassed by the praise, while Kim privately admitted her performance had exceeded the expectations he formed earlier. More importantly, watching her fight helped him decide which fire-related ability would strengthen the physical side of his own build. The system then confirmed another available copy slot, giving him room to add a useful trait during the deeper dungeon run planned for later that day. Kim met Hien and another companion near the dungeon building, where he handed them perception-blocking items before anyone descended underground. The disguises made their faces look forgettable, reducing the chance that veterans would recognize freshmen moving through a restricted area. Because they were entering secretly, normal teleports were too risky, so the group took the long staircase toward the lower dungeon infrastructure. Their destination was Dungeon 388, known as the Altar of the Feathered Serpent. A companion disabled nearby security devices, while Kim and Hien prepared to enter before patrols or veteran teams noticed the intrusion. The dungeon opened into a forest where barbarian worshippers guarded a ritual connected to the serpent altar. An arrow nearly struck them moments after arrival, proving that the enemy scouts had already seen the disguised intruders. Barbarians surrounded the pair and called them sacrifices, creating exactly the opening Kim needed to split the mission into separate objectives. Hien drew his sword and held the main group, while Kim pushed toward the camp the standard dungeon route, encouraged players to ignore. The official clear condition involved stopping the ritual. But Kim remembered that the dungeon's secret reward required searching somewhere far less obvious. Most guards had left the camp to confront Hien, allowing Kim to scatter the weaker defenders without wasting time on prolonged fights. He demanded the chief instead of chasing ordinary enemies, knowing the camp leader carried the real obstacles, protecting the hidden route. A bright beam ripped from the largest tent, and Kim dodged just before the barbarian chief stepped outside, holding a dangerous orb. The chief treated him like another offering and promised less pain if he stopped resisting, which Kim considered with obvious impatience. Kim's actual objective was not winning quickly. He needed to keep the chief occupied long enough for Hien to complete the other part of the plan. The chief's attack was not elemental, making one clean hit potentially fatal, despite Kim's growing list of resistances and copied techniques. Kim relied on maxed fundamentals and movement instead, blocking or avoiding attacks while measuring how the barrier around the chief responded. When he struck the protection directly, the barrier shattered, proving that one of his newer abilities could break defenses around D rank efficiently. The chief immediately changed tactics, confirming that Kim had become more dangerous than the sacrificial victim he initially expected. Elsewhere, Hien fought through the ritual's guardians while searching for the sword connected to the hidden dungeon event. The deeper he moved, the more the ordinary clear route and Kim's secret objective began affecting each other. Hien finally reached the weapon and used it against a powerful enemy, turning the relic into the advantage Kim had predicted. His opponent panicked once the sword changed the battle, and Hien drove through the final exchange to bring the giant threat down. Back at the camp, the chief suddenly reacted to the altar, sensing that the protected weapon had been removed from its place. That reaction told Kim the timing had arrived, allowing him to stop stalling and convert the confrontation into a finishing sequence. Before ending it, he used the newly available copy slot on the priest-like chief and acquired increased sensitivity as a useful trait. The ability looked modest beside Dragonfire or Infernal Fist, but Kim valued anything that improved detection inside hidden or trapped areas. He blocked the chief from retreating toward the altar and unleashed enough firepower to finish the boss before the ritual could recover. With both objectives complete, the secret dungeon route gave Kim confidence that the next restricted challenge could be approached with better preparation. The group returned from the underground run carrying rewards that no ordinary freshman team was supposed to know how to obtain. Kim resisted the urge to show everything immediately, saving the celebration for a quieter setting where loot could be inspected without attracting attention. At a cafe the following day, he brought out several random reward boxes and invited Hien and Yane to experience the less serious side of dungeon clearing. The first opening produced an E-rank rank-up item, respectable enough that everyone agreed the session had started better than expected. Another box yielded a dark D-rank priest bracelet, adding equipment value even before the truly rare rewards appeared. Kim gave one box to each friend, turning the loot ceremony into a shared moment rather than another private optimization exercise. Hien opened his carefully and received an ordinary log, forcing Kim to comfort him while pretending the terrible luck was not hilarious. Yane opened the next box and immediately filled the table with a glow, strong enough to make both boys stare. Her reward reached B rank, confirming that her luck with random systems might be far more useful than anyone had previously realized. Kim began wondering whether her good fortune had an activation condition that could be studied instead of dismissed as coincidence. He later asked Yane to help open or handle additional materials, testing whether her presence could influence outcomes during future crafting and rewards. One result produced spiritual medicine, valuable enough that both of them could benefit by splitting the usable roots. Yane was pleased that her strange luck finally helped Kim directly, while he added another unknown mechanic to the list worth investigating. The rare material needed processing, so Kim carried it to a blacksmith rather than risk ruining something the Academy did not replace easily. His reputation had reached enough workshops that even craftsmen skeptical of freshmen were willing to listen once he presented a serious material request. Kim supplied the specifications, then returned his attention to the larger underground target, hidden beneath another academy structure. That target involved a B-rank dungeon controlled through club bidding, making the next run politically dangerous before any monster appeared. Dong Gaiyong explained that the fencing club had a claim on the dungeon and would not ignore unauthorized interference from rival students. Kim accepted responsibility anyway because waiting for permission would cost the opportunity. His knowledge, said, was currently available. The Thieves Club leader agreed to accompany him for additional compensation, confident that his plan was more detailed than ordinary freshman recklessness. Another member questioned whether a first-year student could possibly clear a B-rank dungeon, unaware that she had already seen Kim fight while he wore a mask. Dong Gaiyong asked permission to reveal the truth, then told her that Kim was the fighter Peoples had started calling the Infernal Fist. The disclosure immediately changed the room's attitude, because that hidden identity carried far more credibility than Kim's public academy reputation. Kim placed a written dungeon guide on the table and showed that the route, objectives, and contingencies had already been mapped before he requested help. The plan required specific teammates rather than raw numbers, so Kim chose Yane and the Thieves Club support instead of assembling a large party. Their target dungeon looked strangely quiet when they arrived, with the surrounding settlement missing the activity expected from a populated area. Kim noticed the absence immediately and concluded that something inside the scenario had already shifted from the ordinary version he remembered. They stopped at a local restaurant and ordered food, using the meal as cover while watching which residents remained and which people had disappeared. The waiter mentioned family preparations and recent activity, giving Kim enough context to confirm that young men were being taken somewhere nearby. That information supported the route in his guide and showed that the dungeon's hostile faction was actively recruiting or abducting people. Kim distributed communication tools and escape scrolls before the operation, stressing that everyone should leave immediately if the scenario exceeded the prepared risks. His role was to attract the main forces and their master, while the others slipped through the settlement and seized the actual target items. The difference from their previous run was enormous. This time, the enemy leader was far stronger than anything Kim intended to defeat directly. He approached the faction's chamber alone and met a guard who repeatedly demanded identification from the silent freshman climbing the stairs. Kim answered by igniting his fist, creating the image of an aggressive intruder before the guard could understand that the intimidation itself was bait. Once the alarm spread, stronger fighters moved toward Kim, exactly as planned, leaving the routes used by Yane and the thieves less protected. Kim escalated carefully, showing enough infernal fist power to keep the enemy focused without trapping himself in a battle he could not safely finish. The faction began mistaking him for the disciple of a famous flame tyrant, an incorrect assumption Kim found useful enough not to correct. Every second they argued about his identity was another second his teammates could move deeper toward the hidden vault. Kim prepared for the hallmaster to appear, knowing that once the real veteran entered the fight, deception and mobility would matter more than raw damage. The B-rank dungeon had stopped being a school challenge and become an operation against people who had survived conflicts long before Kim entered the academy. That was precisely why he had brought a guide, escape tools, and specialized allies, instead of trusting his growing collection of copied skills to solve everything. The hallmaster finally confronted Kim directly, studying the flames around his fists and interpreting every unusual movement through the legend of the tyrant. Kim never confirmed the connection, but he also never denied it strongly enough to remove the enemy's uncertainty. That ambiguity became another weapon, making an experienced opponent spend attention on a false background, while Kim focused only on survival and time. The hallmaster closed distance with claw-like attacks, testing whether the young intruder's confidence came from real skill or borrowed reputation. Kim avoided the first exchanges with footwork that looked far too polished for a freshman, forcing the veteran to increase pressure almost immediately. When the hallmaster mocked him for jumping, Kim used an aerial step to change direction above the expected attack line. The repositioning created a clean opening, and Kim drove a flaming punch downward, hard enough to bury the area in heat and debris. He knew the hit landed, but he also knew one good strike would not defeat a hallmaster who had survived the Great War. The veteran rose from the rubble praising his movement and became even more convinced that Kim belonged to the Flame Tyrant's lineage. Purple energy then gathered around the Hallmaster, revealing techniques associated with a darker faction and confirming that the dungeon's politics were worse than advertised. Kim recognized signs of the demonic cult, which explained why a supposedly ordinary B-rank location contained someone with such lethal experience. The Hallmaster swore to fight seriously, removing the last layer of restraint Kim had been using to measure the encounter safely. Elsewhere, Yane and the Thieves' Club team slipped through routes emptied by Kim's diversion and approached the hidden objectives inside the settlement. Guards still blocked several passages, but the number was manageable because most fighters had already been drawn toward the Infernal Fist disturbance. Their guide led them to a wall mechanisms disguised well enough that anyone exploring normally could pass it, without realizing a vault existed behind it. A useful component had to be dismantled and placed into the structure before it even began moving. Kim's earlier engineering preparations made that step possible, proving why a copied crafting skill could matter as much as a combat spell. The mechanism opened a treasure vault containing chests valuable enough that an undisciplined party might abandon the real mission and start stealing everything. Hias noticed the temptation, but the guide warned that most containers carried anti-intruder talismans capable of releasing poison when touched. The team ignored the wealth and searched specifically for the black chest, described as the safe objective. Following precise instructions, turned a lethal room into a short retrieval, allowing them to leave before curiosity became greed. The escape route seemed clear until Hien joked that the operation would be more exciting if something appeared to challenge them. His companions immediately scolded him, because words like that had already produced enough problems during their underground adventures. Trouble arrived anyway when another veteran blocked their path and attacked with a technique far beyond ordinary first-year defenses. Hien recognized the gap immediately, yet refused to abandon the mission because his friends were depending on the route staying open. The enemy's aura formed a giant serpent-like pressure that made direct resistance look almost suicidal at Hien's current level. Hien remembered his sect, his master, and the promise behind his sword, then chose defense rather than gambling everything on a desperate attack. The veteran released the finishing technique and expected the young swordsman to be crushed despite whatever courage he displayed. Hien met the blow with an art built around softness, redirecting force, instead of trying to overpower something clearly stronger. Their weapons collided, and the enemy suddenly felt an invisible interference that prevented the strike from finishing as expected. The reaction revealed that Hien's sword itself possessed properties far beyond the ordinary weapon he had once carried on the academy train. That brief advantage created enough space for the team to keep the retrieved objectives safe while continuing the escape. Kim, meanwhile, was still trading movement and short bursts of offense with the Hallmaster. Above them, the veteran increased his killing intent, forcing Kim to spend more mana on survival than the original distraction plan had budgeted. Kim answered with combinations of copied movement, wind, flame, and support control, rather than revealing one overwhelming signature attack. Each technique solved a specific problem: distance, angle, balance, defense, or the few seconds needed for his teammates to advance. The Hallmaster interpreted those combinations as evidence of secret tyrant training, which conveniently kept the enemy from asking the correct question about copy. Kim eventually heard the signal he had been waiting for and understood that the hidden items had been secured. From that moment, defeating the Hallmaster became unnecessary. The only remaining objective was leaving without exposing everyone involved. Kim landed one final heavy exchange to prevent immediate pursuit, accepting burns on his own hand from the recoil of the power he released. Even after that attack, he knew the veteran was still dangerous enough to continue fighting, so pride offered no reason to stay. Kim disengaged and moved toward the predetermined safe area while the enemy searched through the ruined surroundings for the vanished intruders. The team regrouped inside an abandoned house, where Kim immediately noticed that one companion looked far paler than ordinary exhaustion could explain. He asked whether Hien had encountered Blacksack, and the reluctant confirmation explained why the escapes team had struggled despite the detailed guide. Kim pulled out a teleportation scroll and ended the dungeon operation before another patrol could discover their hiding place. Back in the normal world, a shadow-based concealment ability hid the returning group while they moved away from the exit, without drawing attention. Everyone understood that clearing the dungeon was only half the problem. Academy clubs would investigate once the ownership breach became known. The group reviewed evidence, injuries, and responsibility before separating, because one careless explanation could expose the Thieves Club and Kim together. And a club president questioned why Kim had gone underground with Dong Yong, already suspicious of the similarities between their willingness to ignore ordinary boundaries. Kim rejected the suggestion that he had joined the Thieves Club, stating that he still intended to remain unaffiliated, despite repeated cooperation. Dong Yong later pulled him aside and apologized because the mission had been messier than the confident plan she advertised beforehand. Kim teased her about the failure, then revealed through his tone that one minor demerit mattered far less to fix than the eggshell. Objective they recovered. She noticed the burns on his hand and asked whether an academy inspector had seen them, understanding how easily the injury could connect him to the incident. Kim kept the explanation controlled, protecting both his hidden identity and the people who had participated in the operation. The disciplinary questioning after the B-rank operation was closer than Kim first admitted. A captured scout butterfly placed the Thieves Club near the underground entrance. Investigators noticed that the party composition looked excessive for harmless sightseeing. Hyen's internal injuries made the excuse even weaker. Someone of his ability should not have been hurt by an ordinary tour. The disciplinary chief also learned that Kim's right hand carried visible burns. Those marks matched the kind of recoil associated with the infernal fist rumors. No dungeon clear record existed, preventing the investigators from proving what happened. Without evidence, the group escaped with only a penalty point. The chief nevertheless concluded that a high-rank hidden run was probable. Dong Yong later asked why Kim kept choosing risks that could expose everything. He answered more seriously than she expected. In his previous game experience, he had effectively graduated from the academy hundreds of times. Those routes had included outcomes where valuable people and possessions were lost. Living inside the world made those losses feel possible again, rather than theoretical. Kim decided he would not accept that kind of loss passively this time. He wanted enough strength to protect both people and things important to him. Dong Yong called the goal difficult but respected the conviction behind it. Her promise to meet him Monday later became the mentoring assignment. Hyen's recovery also revealed that he had used his sect's sacred relic underground. The decision saved the team, but left him ashamed of, depending on borrowed power. Kim treated survival as a foundation for future improvement, instead of a disgrace. Yan's later reward box luck produced an A-rank ingot, not merely ordinary materials. That rare pull gave Kim the core metal needed for his next equipment project. The VIP ticket from his duel convinced a blacksmith president to accept the unusual commission. Hyen also admitted that he had been forced to use the sacred relic connected to his sect because the fight exceeded his normal limits. The experience injured his pride more than his body, since he wanted to earn strength rather than rely on a weapon he still had not mastered. Kim responded without mockery, telling him that surviving an overwhelming opponent was not the same thing as failing to improve. That reassurance mattered because Hyen trusted Kim's combat judgment more than empty praise from someone who had not seen the actual gap. When they returned to their room, Yane had already arrived and once again became involved in Kim's experiments with random rewards and materials. Kim tested her luck through another opening, and the result produced spiritual medicine useful enough to reinforce his suspicion that something unusual affected her outcomes. He split the roots instead of taking everything, allowing Yane to benefit from the same experiment that helped his own crafting plan. She was genuinely pleased to contribute, strengthening a friendship that had started with cookies, awkward silence, and repeated accidental pairings. Kim carried the rare material to a blacksmith and requested processing that required more precision than the ordinary academy workshop could provide casually. The craftsman studied the request and agreed, though the unusual combination would take time and might require additional help before completion. Kim accepted the delay because forcing rare materials through a bad process would destroy resources he could not easily replace. Academy life continued around those secret projects, and the next major change came through the new mentoring program, announced for first-year students. Lee Sudok explained that the Academy wanted students to identify weaknesses in their current builds before those weaknesses became fatal in real dungeons. Mentors would therefore push practical combat rather than offer comfortable lectures, matching Kim's own belief that weaknesses had to be exposed under pressure. Hyen signed up quickly after hearing Kim considered the program worthwhile, while Yane showed far less enthusiasm and mostly complained about being tired. Kim still encouraged her because enormous talent without structured development could remain useless far longer than it should. The mentor assignments placed Kim among several familiar faces in the versatile mage category. including rivals whose strengths came from completely different backgrounds. Their mentor turned out to be Gon, the head of the Thieves' Club, making Kim realize her earlier promise to see him Monday had been literal. Gon explained that versatile mages needed more than spell lists. She first intended to discover how each student failed when forced into unfamiliar situations. Her solution was PvP training, allowing the group to replace part of the weekly match requirement with repeated battles against stronger opposition. Rather than throw first years directly into impossible fights, Gon created optional restrictions that gave students specific objectives against her. One common challenge involved removing marked stickers from the mentor, while surviving long enough to demonstrate movement, judgment, and teamwork. Early pairs were defeated quickly, learning that a mentor did not need to overpower them dramatically when simple positioning exposed every mistake. Kim entered with Yane and surprised her by saying she should fight alone first, instead of relying on his support immediately. He wanted the mentor to reveal Yane's weaknesses honestly, and constant amplification would only hide the problems they were there to discover. Yane attacked with determination, but Gon punished her tendency to focus too heavily on offense and ignore secondary threats. A butterfly-like attack slipped through her attention and detonated, dropping Yane before she could convert her firepower into meaningful progress. Gon bluntly told her that taking hits was part of the lesson, making it clear the program would not protect students from embarrassment. Kim stopped the exchange once the weakness had been demonstrated, telling Yane that fighting far beyond her current level would teach nothing after that point. He praised the effort and sent her to rest, then entered alone, so Gon could evaluate what he was hiding behind the support role. Gon immediately increased difficulty, using shadows, traps, and domain control, rather than the straightforward attacks she had shown the other freshmen. Kim analyzed the area, instead of attacking blindly, recognizing that remaining inside her garden-like domain created continuous risk, while distance consumed her mana. He realized that surviving until her expensive control weakened could produce a draw. But the mentor was clearly testing whether he could create something better. Gon used shadow movement to attack from angles normal first years would struggle to track, forcing Kim to rely on sensitivity, footwork, and prediction. Her projectile arts revealed a core level far above the students, explaining how she maintained mobility skills with costs that would empty weaker mages. Kim did not need to defeat her outright. He needed to understand which combination of movement and timing could reach the assigned objective. He began linking copied abilities that had previously existed as separate tools, using one to create the angle another required. Gon noticed the adaptation and stopped treating him like a freshman who had simply memorized a few impressive techniques. The mentor's pressure transformed copy from a collection mechanic into what Kim actually wanted, a flexible system for constructing answers during combat. Every failure revealed where his current combinations broke down, which mattered more than pretending the growing arsenal had no weaknesses. Kim left the first mentoring session with new information about himself, Yane, and Gon's methods, rather than a meaningless victory screen. The Academy intended mentoring to correct student weaknesses, but Kim also saw it as another controlled environment for studying advanced techniques safely. Unlike enemies in forbidden dungeons, mentors could push him to the edge without making death the price of one mistaken experiment. That made the program valuable enough that Kim began planning training outside the official sessions instead of merely attending what the Academy required. His copied skills were multiplying, yet the larger challenge remained the same. Each one needed control, resources, and a reason to exist inside the build. Kim's real advantage was not owning many talents. It was knowing when one small talent could make every other piece around it more effective. Gon's mentoring rules limited her abilities to C rank and required each pair to remove 3 stickers from her body to claim victory. Kim immediately noticed the mission reward increased when the task was completed quickly, giving him a reason to finish rather than abuse the generous time limit. After watching another pair fail, he entered with Manhwa, the Ruby Tower Fire Mage, whose previous battles had already exposed several habits. Manhwa expected Kim to support her from the beginning, but he deliberately ordered her forward alone so the mentor could expose her weaknesses clearly. Gon attacked from unexpected angles, forcing the Fire Mage to choose between landing damage and maintaining awareness of everything around her. Manhwa managed to strike 1 sticker with an aggressive close-range attempt, proving that her instinct for commitment could create openings when used carefully. Gon immediately punished the success by restraining her with butterfly magic and detonating another attack before she could reset her focus. Kim stopped the lesson once the point had been made, telling Yonghua that continuing against the mentor in that condition would add pain without adding information. He praised the sticker she reached, sent her to recover, and then asked Gon to face him alone with the replay disabled. Gon agreed because she was curious about how much strength the mysterious freshman had concealed during ordinary academy evaluations. Kim activated, overheating at a higher rank, accepting the strain because the temporary boost improved the speed he needed for the sticker objective. Silent steps erased part of his approach, and he reached Gon before she expected a support mage to close the distance that quickly. The first sticker came off almost immediately, forcing the mentor to abandon the relaxed attitude she had used against the earlier students. Kim refused to give her a pause, combining wind with movement to keep pressure on her, while the limited arena rules still favored decisive action. A wind sphere drove sand and force across the space, making Gon shift position and briefly lose the clean sight line she preferred. Kim appeared through that disruption and removed the second sticker before she fully reset her footing. Gon finally activated a more troublesome domain, surrounding the arena with shadows and thorns that punished anyone remaining carelessly inside the controlled zone. Kim understood that staying far away would let overheating expire, but rushing blindly would put him directly into the mentor's prepared traps. He also recognized that maintaining the domain consumed Gon's mana quickly, giving him a strategic window if he could survive without wasting his own resources. Rather than retreat, Kim entered the dangerous space. At the moment, her options narrowed and attacked from an angle created by her own commitment. Gon prepared a kick, only for Kim to appear beside her, disrupt her balance, and force her to the ground. His hand reached the final sticker before she could recover, completing the objective under the exact rule set the mentor had created. Gon accepted the loss but immediately changed the next, telling the group that their close combat defense was far weaker than their magic suggested. She made hand-to-hand fundamentals the new focus and offered additional attempts, refusing to let one clever victory become an excuse to ignore basic weaknesses. Kim stayed interested even after clearing the sticker mission, because a separate trait required direct mentor assistance to unlock. He told Gon he wanted distortion, an evasion-based trait whose condition depended on repeatedly surviving attacks rather than simply reading a skill once. The request surprised her, but she agreed to help and removed the limiter that had restricted her power during the first-year exercise. Gon warned that the unrestricted version would be completely different, then disappeared through shadow movement before Kim could settle into a comfortable rhythm. Projectiles came from hidden angles, forcing him to dodge attacks whose rank and speed were far above the practice patterns used moments earlier. Kim recognized her clan's techniques and realized her core was strong enough to sustain movement abilities that would exhaust an ordinary student rapidly. Distortion required accumulated successful evasions, and the enormous rank gap meant each clean dodge contributed several stacks toward the condition. That made Gon the perfect training partner. Every attack was dangerous enough to accelerate progress, as long as Kim avoided actually being hit. He stopped thinking like someone trying to win and began treating every projectile as another measurable step toward the trait requirement. Gon eventually exhausted enough mana to collapse for a break, while Kim remained standing only because his attention never relaxed through the barrage. She praised his evasive ability and asked him to preserve a replay, curious about the secret training logic behind what he had just done. Kim refused to reveal the requirement freely and negotiated a favor voucher instead, protecting information that could expose how his progression actually worked. Gon accepted, after he promised the future favor could be rejected if it crossed a line she was unwilling to accept. Their agreement gave Kim both continued mentorship and another social resource, while Gon gained access to evidence she considered worth the price. Elsewhere, Yane's own mentorship began under a woman who addressed her formally as my lady, rather than treating her like an ordinary freshman. The mentor had known Yane long before the academy and remembered a prodigy whose enormous talent was constantly undermined by complete lack of motivation. Learning that Yane voluntarily joined the mentoring program had been shocking enough that the woman treated the opportunity like a rare turning point. She expected to spend the session rebuilding fundamentals, then watched Yane materialize a weapon and form a magic bullet with unexpectedly precise control. The mentor prepared to explain projection, only for Yane to fire the refined shot through her defense and send her backward across the arena. That one exchange proved Yan had learned multiple skills in a month that previous tutors had failed to make interesting enough for her to practice. When asked who had taught her, Yane named Kim, forcing the mentor to reconsider what the freshman support had actually changed in her life. The most surprising part was not the spell itself, but Yane's expression when she remembered training with him and smiled naturally. Her mentor had spent years watching the talented girl remain detached, so seeing genuine enthusiasms mattered more than the damaged barrier. The next day, Kim checked on Hyen's mentoring and learned his friend had been placed near strong swords, students who could provide useful experience. Hyen wanted a duel with one of them, but had already been rejected, so Kim offered to discover what might make the opponent reconsider. He treated the problem like every other build obstacle, find the missing incentive, instead of repeatedly asking for the same result. Yane arrived soon afterward with her mentor, Jang Mi, who introduced herself formally and asked Kim for a private conversation. Her business card revealed that she held a leadership position inside a powerful group connected to Yane's family. Kim initially assumed the family had hired ordinary tutors, but Anjong Mi explained that none had motivated Yane as effectively as he had. She considered Kim uniquely qualified to discuss the girl's future. Because his informal guidance achieved progress, expensive private instruction never produced. Kim asked whether Yane simply ignored lessons at home. Creating an awkward silence that confirmed motivation had always been the real problem. Anjong Mi reported that Yane's abilities had advanced to C rank and asked what direction should come next. Kim answered that her offense was already dangerous, while mobility and defense remained too weak to survive opponents who could deny her firing space. He recommended Featherwalk, a movement skill that reduced effective weight and increased speed without forcing her into a completely different fighting style. The skill book was extremely expensive, but Kim correctly assumed the family group could acquire something that would be impossible for most freshmen. Anjong Mi agreed immediately, thanked him for the guidance, and offered Kim a valuable movement item of his own as compensation. The gift was Cloud Step, another mobility technique expensive enough that Kim accepted without pretending. Pride mattered more than progression. She also asked him to continue looking after Yane, recognizing that the girl's willingness to learn from him was something money could not reproduce reliably. Kim agreed, but he still intended to let Yan make choices instead of turning her development into another character, build controlled entirely by him. Hours later, he returned to his own training and the unfinished workshop problem, waiting beneath all the academy exercises. The blacksmith contacted him because the rare material combination had reached a point where ordinary heat could not complete the processing safely. One component resisted the furnace, making continued force more likely to ruin the project than solve the underlying thermal problem. Kim had anticipated something similar and began looking for a fire user whose trait could create the extreme condition the material required. Hong Yonghua became the obvious candidate because her fire behaved differently from ordinary ruby tower techniques. Kim approached her carefully, knowing she disliked being treated as a tool and still carried irritation from several previous confrontations. He asked about the rare water flame trait she possessed, surprising her because very few people even knew the unusual inheritance existed. Water flame could burn under conditions normal fire could not tolerate and offered a natural advantage against ice-based defenses. The problem was that Yonghua's trait remained stuck around E rank, despite the potential hidden inside it. Kim explained that powerful traits often grew poorly through ordinary repetition, because their advancement required more specific triggers. That was why endless standard practice had frustrated her. She was strengthening technique, while barely touching the condition controlling the trait itself. Yanghua hated learning that Kim understood the weakness, but frustration gave way to interest when he suggested a method that could actually change it. He needed her flame for the frozen material, and she needed an environment capable of pushing water flame beyond its current stagnant state. The arrangement gave both sides a reason to cooperate, without pretending their personalities had suddenly become compatible. At the workshop, the blacksmith prepared the resistant metal while Kim positioned Yonghua where her fire could create repeated thermal shocks safely. She concentrated a pillar of flame onto one point, forcing heat against material that remained unnaturally cold inside the furnace. The blacksmith admitted he had never seen a student maintain that level of penetration against the ice-like resistance for so long. Kim monitored both the material and Yonghua because pushing the trait too hard would waste the project if she lost control before the breakthrough condition appeared. Progress remained slow, but the first successful reaction proved the method worked well enough to justify continuing for several more days. Yonghua finally had training that connected directly to her rare trait instead of repeating generic fire exercises that had stopped producing meaningful growth. Kim gained the specialized heat his crafting plan required, demonstrating again that developing another person's strength could advance his own goals simultaneously. The mentoring cycle also continued, giving him another arena in which relationships, abilities, and weaknesses were changing at the same time. Gon increased the difficulty of later sessions because the freshman had already seen the basic sticker exercise and could no longer claim surprise. Students who previously charged blindly began protecting their backs, coordinating pressure, and recognizing when an objective mattered more than dealing damage. Kim watched those improvements carefully because stronger classmates meant better allies and more valuable techniques to study later. He also continued evasion training with Gon after official sessions, refusing to stop just because the mentorship requirement had technically been satisfied. Each extended session pushed distortion closer to completion, while forcing him to refine movement skills obtained from entirely different sources. Silent steps helped with approach, cloud step improved repositioning, and his sensitivity trait made hidden attacks easier to detect before they became unavoidable. None of those abilities replaced the others. Together they formed the layered mobility package Kim had been trying to construct since arriving. The mentor noticed that his movement no longer looked like one school or clan, because each transition borrowed a different principle. Kim preferred that result because enemies could prepare for a known style, while a modular build could change the answer between exchanges. By the end of the week, Gon looked more exhausted by Kim's voluntary training than by the students she had originally been assigned to teach. She complained that mentoring him felt less like guiding a freshman and more like being used as a living dungeon mechanic. Kim thanked her sincerely anyway, because without someone of her level, the evasion condition would have taken far longer to satisfy. Gon reminded him that their favor agreement still existed, making it clear his rapid progress had created social debts along with new power. Kim accepted that cost. In a real academy filled with people, progression could not be reduced to items and skills alone. Every favor, rivalry, mentor, and friendship had become another variable that could strengthen his path or destroy it if handled carelessly. Yonghua's older sister privately asked that the fire mage take responsibility for removing the mentor stickers during the next practical round. She expected Yonghua to lose, but believed the challenge itself would force the girl to grow faster than another safe training session. Kim agreed because the request aligned with his own plan to strengthen Yonghua while obtaining the fire needed for the workshop material. During their next session, he adjusted the mentoring rules so Yonghua had to attack, while he focused almost entirely on evasion and support. The new arrangement let Gon observe whether the fire mage could create openings without depending on Kim to dictate every decision. Yonghua opened aggressively with fire, then used the explosion as cover to close distance, instead of repeating the obvious ranged pattern Gon already knew. Kim noticed the improvement immediately because she had started turning one spell into a setup for the next, rather than treating each attack separately. He dodged around the edge of the exchange, while Gon watched how both students adapted to pressure they could not solve through raw power. Yonghua eventually collapsed from exhaustion and complained that Kim somehow avoided everything. Without appearing to panic once, Kim stopped her from leaving, and finally explained why he had pushed the sparring long enough to measure her rare water flame properly. He told her that the trait's weakness was not lack of power, but a growth barrier ordinary cold materials could not challenge for long enough. Yonghua had tried similar training before, but every target simply melted before the trait was forced to exceed its current limit. Kim proposed using an intensely cold metal that resisted melting, creating a sustained conflict between fire and ice instead of a brief temperature difference. She doubted the plan because earlier attempts had failed, yet agreed once Kim showed that the workshop already possessed exactly the right material. The blacksmith remained skeptical, reminding them that another fire mage had already tried to process the metal without producing meaningful progress. Kim asked for one more chance and placed responsibility on the specific trait rather than pretending any strong fire would work. Yonghua concentrated her pillar into a narrow point and forced heat against the frozen metal instead of spreading damage across the furnace. Thermal shock began penetrating the surface, while the metal continued resisting, giving water flame the prolonged opposition Kim wanted. The blacksmith admitted the result was different from previous attempts and agreed to let them continue over several days. That single breakthrough advanced two objectives simultaneously. The rare material began processing, and Yonghua finally had a credible path past E rank. Days later, Kim noticed immediately that Yonghua looked unusually cheerful before the final mentoring session. He guessed that her trait had ranked up, leaving her shocked that the improvement was visible enough for him to read from her behavior. The other students returned from their own attempts, looking exhausted, admitting that removing even one sticker from Gon remained extremely difficult. Yonghua realized that taking a single sticker would already put her ahead, turning the final challenge into a concrete goal instead of an impossible victory. Kim told her he would support actively this time, and asked only that she use everything learned during their recent training. She entered with less fear than before, because the new trait progress had finally connected effort with a result she could feel directly. Yonghua opened with a massive fire wave, forcing Gan to defend rather than immediately dictate the arena's pace. The flames also interfered with the mentor's shadows, revealing that the opening attack had been chosen for control as much as damage. Yonghua pressed forward with her staff, allowing fire to climb the shadow weapon until Gan had to abandon the comfortable blocking angle. The mentor jumped back, and Yonghua landed a solid strike to the body before the opening completely disappeared. Gan accepted the hit deliberately because shadow butterflies had already trapped Yonghua's feet, setting up an immediate counterattack. The explosion sent the freshman backward, but Kim raised a barrier and prevented the punishment from ending the round instantly. He scolded Yonghua for relaxing after one good hit, reinforcing the same awareness problem Gan had exposed on the first day. The mentor increased pressure with daggers, while Yonghua used improved judgment to block exchanges she previously would have lost before reacting. Gan praised the sharper movement but warned that the attack pattern still became predictable when Yonghua committed too heavily. Kim waited until the right moment to join, forcing Gan to split attention between his approach and the fire mage already pressing from the front. That hesitation created the opening Yonghua needed to tear one sticker from the mentor's arm. She celebrated for a heartbeat, then remembered Kim's warning, and returned immediately to a defensive posture before Gan could punish the distraction. They still lost the full match, but Yonghua became the only student in the group to remove a sticker during that cycle. The result mattered because it measured actual improvement rather than another vague statement that her talent had finally begun to awaken. After the session, Yonghua thanked Kim for the support, and he reminded her that the sticker came from decisions she executed herself. She began reconsidering the lazy, cowardly image she had formed of him during the earliest academy battles. A new notification then confirmed another level increase for her, making the mentoring result feel even more concrete. Gan returned after everyone left and complained about the strange resets and ranks associated with Kim's progression. Kim reminded her that their private training agreement was not finished yet, forcing the exhausted mentor back into another round of high-level attacks. She attacked repeatedly while Kim accumulated the final evasions needed for distortion, each dodge carrying more value because of the enormous rank gap. A systems notification finally appeared in the middle of the barrage, distracting him just as Gan 6 accelerated for another clean strike. Her attack seemed to pass directly through Kim, even though the trajectory looked perfect, leaving the mentor certain she had made contact. Kim confirmed the new trait had activated. Distortion could cause a successful evasion state that made an otherwise accurate hit fail to connect. Gan immediately called the effect broken, but Kim explained that the trait carried requirements and could not simply erase every attack automatically. She asked whether she could learn it too, and Kim revealed that progress came from repeatedly avoiding opponents stronger than the user. He jokingly suggested using academy teachers as training targets, giving Gan an idea she clearly found more appealing than her exhausted expression suggested. When Kim tried to end the session, Gan used the favor he owed and invited him somewhere the following week. Without explaining the destination, she promised that giving away the plan would ruin the fun, leaving Kim with another future obligations created by the mentorship exchange. A week later, Kim found Yan practicing in the hallway and noticed that her new movement technique had already become far smoother. Anjong Mi appeared with a detailed training schedule, proud of how quickly the girl had progressed over the weekend. Kim studied the plan and immediately saw a problem. The amount of repetitive work risked exhausting the one student whose motivation remained fragile. Yane described the mentoring as boring, while Mi insisted repetition was necessary for reliable fundamentals. The argument became absurd when Yane bluntly declared that Kim was interesting and her mentor was boring, leaving both adults temporarily speechless. She also complained about sleep, and Mi revealed that Yane's preferred 4-hour naps did not fit any serious training schedule. Kim recognized that forcing the issue could make Yane abandon training completely, which would erase the progress everyone was trying to protect. He proposed a real break instead, warning the mentor privately that pushing until collapse would be worse than sacrificing one day of practice. Yane immediately revealed that she wanted to go downtown, rather than spend the entire break sleeping. Mi offered to escort her, only to be rejected because Yane considered that option too boring to qualify as a break. When asked who she preferred, Yane invited Kim directly, surprising him enough that he briefly wondered whether refusing would be simpler. He accepted after deciding one free day was a reasonable investment if it preserved her motivation for the much longer training plan. Kim set one condition: Yan had to return and work seriously afterward, instead of using the outing as an excuse to disappear from practice. She agreed, turning what looked like wasted training time into another deliberate decision about sustainable progression. Back in class, Lee announced the previous practical results, and Kim's perfect score drew the predictable mixture of surprise and admiration. He checked on his friends rather than dwell on the ranking, commenting that their scores and completed maps showed solid progress even without perfection. The next weekly role changed everything by making students guardians rather than attackers inside the dungeon simulation. Each team would protect a goddess statue, and the final score would depend on how much damage reached the objective. The exercise punished students who only knew how to chase enemies, because every monster slipping them could attack something that could not dodge. Gon added her own restrictions for the mentoring group, including short-range damage rules that made familiar ranged habits less reliable. Her second change was worse. She would personally command the monsters, replacing predictable artificial behavior with deliberate strategy. Kim understood immediately that the creatures would stop acting like disposable mobs and start exploiting whatever weakness each student displayed. Gon also switched partners, so nobody could rely on the exact coordination practiced during the previous week. Kim was paired with the Lightning Committee girl, whose aggressive style had clashed with his attitude since the train ride. They entered an ancient temple containing the goddess statue and began inspecting routes before the first wave arrived. The new objective forced both of them to think about coverage, not simply who could eliminate the largest number of monsters first. Kim positioned himself around the statue and asked his partner to control one side, rather than chase every target she saw. The opening goblin wave looked simple enough that she assumed overwhelming lightning would solve the entire problem quickly. She rushed forward and destroyed enemies at close range, confident that speed and power would prevent anything from reaching the objective. Gon's command immediately tested that confidence by spreading monsters instead of letting them gather into one convenient group. Several goblins ignored the strongest student and moved around her, turning pursuit into the exact mistake the guardian role was designed to punish. Kim blocked some of the routes but watched carefully instead of saving every error, because the exercise needed to expose what they had to fix. One monster slipped through the open side and struck the statue, while his partner remained focused on the enemies directly in front of her. The damage revealed that her greatest weakness was not insufficient lightning, but failure to think about the objective. When combat became exciting, Kim tried to redirect her, yet the formation had already opened enough gaps for Gon's monsters to increase pressure from multiple directions. Another wave reached the statue, and the team failed the mission, despite easily overpowering most individual goblins. The Lightning Mage could barely accept the result because she had won nearly every direct exchange and still lost the actual test. Gon told them the attempt was not terrible for a first run, then sent the next team inside while they reviewed what went wrong. Kim treated the failure as useful data. The statue converted vague teamwork problems into visible damage that could be measured and corrected. The next pair entered with their own rivalry and immediately showed different weaknesses, giving Moore's examples of how Guardian strategy changed every matchup. He watched their positioning, enemy responses, and recovery choices, instead of assuming the answer from his first failed attempt would fit everyone. The exercise was another reminder that support could not be reduced to amplification. Sometimes this best contribute was deciding where another fighter should stand. Kim began planning a second attempt built around lanes, threat priority, and reserving his own abilities for enemies that bypassed the front line. His partner would still receive the spotlight against elite targets, but only if the ordinary monsters could no longer exploit the space behind her. That required coordination she had never needed in one-on-one PvP, making the failure more valuable than another easy victory against weaker students. Kim left the first Guardian round already knowing that the next run had to protect the objective first and satisfy pride second. The first Guardian attempt resumed with goblins, pressing from several directions at once. Kim knocked one creature aside before it could reach the statue. His partner shouted at him for leaving the front line. Kim reminded her that her assigned job was holding the main approach. He promised that anything slipping through would become his responsibility. She accepted reluctantly and returned to the wave in front. The victory condition required keeping the statue alive for 10 minutes. That timer changed every decision about when to spend mana. A sudden explosion tore open part of the temple wall. The lightning mage stopped mid-fight when a stronger goblin emerged through it. She called the surprise unfair, but the commander had designed exactly that reaction. Kim started toward the stronger enemy before another group entered behind it. The breach had created a second lane directly toward their objective. Kim gathered wind and cleared the new group before they spread. His partner stared, briefly confused by how quickly the threat disappeared. Kim ignored the reaction and redirected her attention toward the remaining enemies. She attacked another goblin, forgetting the short-range restriction for a moment. The spell failed to produce the result she expected. That hesitation gave two smaller monsters room to run behind her. Kim saw the mistake before she noticed the open lane. Her attention had locked onto one target while the battlefield changed around her. The goblins reached the goddess statue and began striking it directly. Kim could not cover every gap created at the same time. The objective broke, ending their first defense with a clear failure. His partner stood frozen, unable to reconcile winning fights with losing the test. Gon appeared and called the attempt acceptable for a first try. She sent them out to review, while another pair entered. The next team returned earlier than expected, carrying their own frustration. Rivalries immediately resurfaced once students compared how long each defense lasted. Kim paid more attention to the different power combinations than the arguments. One pair showed better natural synergy despite having less individual firepower. That reinforced the lesson the statue had already made obvious. Team efficiency depended on coverage, not simply damage totals. The lightning mage approached Kim afterward with a direct question. She wanted to know whether he had expected their defense to collapse. Kim admitted he suspected an extra complication would appear. Gon had never designed previous tests to remain predictable for long. His calmness came from holding back long enough to study the command pattern. The girl accused him of being too passive again. Her complaint reminded Kim of their earlier argument about effort and discomfort. He mentioned her grandfather, the famous Thunderlord, surprising her immediately. Her expression brightened when Kim remembered the person she admired most. Kim used that mood shift to return the discussion toward strategy. He accepted responsibility for being overly cautious during the failed attempt. Then he asked whether she could control the monsters, slipping past her. Kim offered to intercept anything she missed until they learned more. She considered the proposal far more reasonable than his earlier passive style. Their conversation drifted briefly toward a ticket and an old favor. Kim tried to claim credit for helping Hyun indirectly. She rejected that logic immediately, forcing him to change topics. The other pair finished while they argued, lasting noticeably longer. That result made the lightning mage feel cheated by their first strategy. Her rival noticed the frustration and began provoking her openly. The two girls traded confident looks before the next attempt. Kim let the rivalry sharpen motivation without letting it replace planning. Back inside the temple, he assigned his partner one side explicitly. He positioned himself between the secondary lanes and the goddess statue. She revealed a different plan for controlling the first wave. Instead of chasing targets, she placed both hands toward the ground. Lightning spread across a wide section of the temple floor. The field was designed to slow enemies rather than kill them immediately. Goblins rushed into the charged area and lost their mobility. Kim recognized the improvement as soon as the first wave stalled. She was spending mana to buy control instead of chasing damage. That choice kept the main lane organized for the first time. Kim turned toward the wall where the previous breach had appeared. The stone broke again, almost exactly where he expected. Goblins poured through the opening into his side of the temple. Kim met them with wind before they could form a second wave. He jokingly declared that side entrance permanently closed. The monsters were thrown away from the objective in one sweep. With both lanes controlled, the statue remained undamaged past the early phase. The defense crossed 5 minutes, without repeating the previous collapse. Kim immediately expected the commander to raise the difficulty again. His partner admitted she had the same unpleasant feeling. Temple pillars shook as something heavier entered the battlefield. An elite goblin appeared much earlier than the normal scenario suggested. Gon had accelerated the boss pressure to test their improved coordination. The lightning mage moved forward to meet the elite directly. Kim stayed near the statue instead of following her into the duel. She landed a heavy opening strike and forced the elite backward. Ordinary goblins used the distraction to search for another route. One creature slipped around the duel and sprinted toward the objective. Kim raised a barrier and stopped it before impact. He ordered his partner to ignore the runner and finish the elite. She trusted the instruction and returned to the stronger opponent. Lightning gathered around her feet as she increased her movement speed. The next charge hit the elite with enough force to stagger it. Kim saw that she finally understood the division of responsibility. He amplified himself and prepared to control the growing side wave. Wind threw several goblins backward without disturbing her duel. Another monster stayed farther away and watched his defense carefully. The goblin suddenly threw an axe instead of approaching normally. Kim stopped the projectile with magic before it reached the statue. The ranged attack triggered one of his defensive effects unexpectedly. He smiled because the monster intelligence was higher than he assumed. Gon's command was forcing goblins to adapt around his preferred range. The elite also changed, wrapping itself in dark reinforcement energy. His partner's finishing attack collided with the strengthened defense. The clean victory she expected disappeared the moment the elite adapted. The elite countered immediately, after blocking the lightning attack. She barely escaped the direct strike aimed at her body. The missed blow continued past her toward the statue. Kim shifted to intercept, but the angle was already dangerous. The attack smashed into the objective and shattered the goddess statue. Their second attempt ended despite lasting far longer than the first. Kim called it close and began listing the few adjustments still needed. His partner did not want generic encouragement after another visible failure. He recognized the frustration and stopped trying to soften the result. Gon ended the session and ordered everyone to study the replays. The students left carrying more tactical questions than they had started with. Kim stayed long enough to thank the mentor for the training. Then he asked whether she had planned the elite goblin's behavior. Gon shrugged and claimed she had only established the objective. She insisted that real combat produced variables nobody could predict completely. Her answer reminded Kim that game knowledge could never replace adaptation here. Even familiar scenarios now contained people making independent decisions. That meant his build needed flexible tools, not only remembered solutions. Kim returned his attention to his own missing offensive combination. Wind techniques had worked repeatedly, but one stronger spell remained unavailable. The ability he wanted was Spiral Explosion. In the game, it had been essential before he developed Spiral Impulse. Learning it directly was impossible under his current conditions. 3 weaker abilities had to be combined first. Kim therefore stopped chasing the final spell and targeted its prerequisites. He found Deng Yulong, someone capable of helping with the wind techniques. She recognized immediately that his request involved another wind spell. Her first answer was an irritated refusal. Kim kept explaining until the request sounded less like another nuisance. The negotiation became another example of progression, depending on people, not menus. The following day, classmates gathered for lunch between training sessions. Hansomi arrived with food and settled at a table with another student. Kim joined them because he wanted to review the Guardian test practically. Rather than lecture, he asked whether they had studied the replay carefully. They agreed that the structure of the defense had improved. The unresolved problem remained the elite goblin's sudden attack on the statue. Kim asked what happened immediately before that strike. The question forced them to remember more than the final impact. They recalled a roar and a distinct movement before the elite committed. Kim confirmed that those cues mattered more than the attack's raw speed. The elite had telegraphed the dangerous behavior before changing targets, recognizing that cue could turn an impossible surprise into a prepared response. Kim told them to watch enemy movement, instead of staring only at health. That advice gave the group a concrete adjustment for the next attempt. The students left lunch with far more confidence than after the failed run. Kim returned to the arena and waited for their turn again. Another pair remained inside longer than before, suggesting they had improved too. Their eventual success proved the Guardian Challenge could be completed consistently. Kim's partner grew irritated when she saw a rival emerge satisfied. He told her to relax before rivalry ruined the new plan. She demanded that they enter and finish the test properly this time. The third attempt began with the same temple and familiar statue. Her lightning field appeared immediately instead of after the first crisis. The prepared ground slowed the opening goblins before they could spread. She charged into the controlled zone and struck the nearest creature. Another goblin tried escaping, but was trapped by the lingering electricity. Her accuracy had improved, compared with the first defensive attempt. Kim stayed behind and monitored the lanes rather than duplicate her job. The early waves remained, contained without draining his strongest abilities. That conservation mattered because the elite had not appeared yet. A growl finally announced the stronger goblin's return. His partner spotted it quickly and asked Kim for cover. She concentrated a large amount of lightning before committing to the duel. The first heavy strike landed cleanly on the elite. Kim approved the plan, but watched whether she could finish fast enough. He understood that his role was supporting until the objective survived. Ordinary goblins began spreading away from the center again. Their formation showed that Gon was testing the statue from range now. Several monsters raised weapons instead of rushing his defensive position. Kim moved to block the first thrown attacks. Wind and barriers intercepted multiple axes before they reached the target. One projectile slipped through the crowded defense. The axe struck the goddess statue directly. The objective lost 8% durability in one hit. Kim smiled despite the damage, because the new problem was finally visible. The commander had shifted from infiltration to ranged pressure. Protecting lanes alone would no longer guarantee a clean clear. He adjusted his position to cover projectile trajectories as well. The lightning mage continued fighting the elite without turning around. That discipline showed she trusted Kim more than during their first attempt. The elite tried dragging her away from the statue's safest angle. She resisted the bait and kept the duel within their planned zone. Kim used small spells rather than waste large attacks on individual goblins. Every saved burst preserved mana for the next unexpected commander tactic. Several enemies changed spacing after seeing their axes intercepted. Kim realized the group was reacting to his defense, rather than repeating scripts. Copy had given him many tools, but judgment decided which one mattered now. A powerful spell used at the wrong moment would only open another lane. Kim watched the elite's shoulders for the roar and movement cue from the replay. His partner focused on damage, while he tracked the behavior transition. The ordinary goblins continued, forcing to divide attention deliberately. Another axe flew, but Kim deflected it earlier this time. The next projectile came from a different angle, almost immediately. He changed stance and covered the statue without abandoning the elite queue. Their third attempt had become less about strength and more about information management. Every monster was now testing whether the pair could maintain that discipline. Kim understood why the Guardian role had been chosen after offensive weeks. A support who could not prioritize threats would eventually fail regardless of talent. The same lesson applied to his copied arsenal outside this simulated temple. More abilities only increased the cost of choosing the wrong one at the wrong time.